Thank you, Larry. Good morning, everybody. It's so great to see you and to be with you this morning, even though we're not in person. We are so lucky to have with us this morning Dennis Palumbo, his experience, and we were talking a little bit about that. Is more than just novel writing, and he has a very unique insight, not only into people in general, in human nature in general, but writers in particular. So I'm really looking forward to his advice this morning about writing fear and suspense, because who can scare yourself better than you? So think about that for a minute. But anyway, Dennis is a writer and licensed psychotherapist in private practice, specializing in creative issues. Formerly a Hollywood screenwriter, Dennis's credits include the feature film My Favorite Year, for which he was nominated for a WGA Award for Best Screenplay. He was also a staff writer for the ABC TV series Welcome Back, Kotter, and has written numerous series episodes and pilots. His mystery thrillers Mirror Image, Fever Dream, Night Terrors, Phantom Limb, Head Wounds, and his upcoming Panic Attack, which is currently out, features psychologist and trauma expert Daniel Rinaldi. He is also the author of Writing from the Inside Out, as well as a collection of mystery short stories From Crime to Crime. Dennis's short fiction has appeared in Ellery Queen's Mystery Suspense magazine, The Strand, and elsewhere, and he provides articles and reviews for the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Lancet, and others. Dennis currently writes the Hollywood on the Couch column for the Psychology Today website, and his work helping writers has been profiled in the New York Times, Premier Magazine, Fade In, Angelino, GQ, the Los Angeles Times, and other publications, as well as on NPR and CNN. Oh my gosh, I think I've almost covered all of them, Dennis. He's also appeared numerous times on Between the Lines, the PBS author interview show. Okay, good. All right, so welcome, Dennis, and I'm going to turn the camera over to you to talk a little bit about writing and to get your insights.
Thank you so much, Maddie. It's very nice to be here. When I listened to your list of some of the misadventures of my life, it just reminds me how old I am, about how long I've been around. Also, I do need to point out you left out a really interesting credit of mine. My writing partner and I wrote the first episode of Love Boat. Now, wow, laughs when I say that, but I just got a 13-cent residual check from the Balkans. So who's laughing now? That's the way I look at it. It cost the Writers Guild more to send me the 13-cent check than the 13-cent check. Anyway, it is very nice to be here. As Maddie says, I write the Daniel Rinaldi mystery series. I've also sent to Maddie a short story, the one and only short story in which Daniel Rinaldi appears. It's part of an anthology put together by my publisher, then Poison Pen Press. They've now been acquired by Source Books, but it's an anthology called Bound by Mystery, and it's all original mystery short stories. It's a very, very nice collection. And so I sent this short story to Maddie because it illustrates some of the aspects of building suspense and tension that I'm going to talk about. So anyone who's interested, I'm sure she can send it to you. Again, thank you for all. You're giving up your Saturday mornings to do this. So amazed, just amazed. I want to talk a little bit about building fear and suspense by starting with the most basic question. What scares you? The things that are suspenseful or that induce dread in my readers are things that scare me. And I think that one of the best things any crime writer can do is sit with themselves and think about their nightmares, their childhood traumas, the things that if they watch a half hour of news, what spikes their fear and worry, and what other story that might terrify someone else, you just see it maybe in social or political terms. But then there's some home invasion story and you start feeling your pulse quicken. Or there's some carjacking story, So the first thing I think a writer should do is pay attention to what in your life scares you. I mean, I'll be very honest, ever since I was a kid, one of my recurring nightmare themes is someone being something different than they present. I think that's one of the reasons I'm drawn to writing and reading mysteries, is because there's a lot of deception. I think it's one of the reasons I like being a therapist, because what we're looking for is the authentic aspects of a person's subjective experience, not what they present, but who they really are. I've had this brought home to me many, many times in my practice, because when I was in show business, when I was a screenwriter, there were certain writers and directors that I admired enormously, and I assumed lived these kind of golden lives where everything they wrote was perfect. They were very untroubled by their creative process. Well, over the last 30 years, I've had dozens and dozens of my idols become patients in my therapy practice. And it has been astounding to me how much they struggle, how worried they are, how neurotic they are, how insecure they are, regardless of their level of success. And it brings home the difference between a person's public perceived persona and what's really going on inside. And if you think about writing mystery, one of the major tropes is that what a person is presenting to the public or even to their intimates is not exactly who they are. I mean, what are suspects other than people who are presenting one thing, but might in fact be something else? So one of the things that drives my mystery novels, and I think give them suspense and a sense of dread for the reader, is the feeling that everything is not as it seems, and that you can't take at face value things. And so I would say, what scares you? What terrifies you? And I think you'll find that it's easier to develop suspense and dread if you in yourself feel suspense and dread. So that's just sort of a general thought that I have. Just as a side note, I've come to believe that all writing is autobiographical anyway, no matter who or what you're writing about. And so the more you mine your own experience, the more you look at what scares you. I mean, the best example is Stephen King talking about how, you know, for example, if he's going through an airport and there's sliding doors open and close, he said the first thing that enters his mind is, what if they close on me? He said, and there's a short story right there. And so essentially what I'm saying is, if you were a kid who thought there were monsters under the bed, what if you wrote as though there were monsters under the bed? So that would be my overall thought. Be in touch with your own heart and mind. What scares you? All right. So if you think, well, when I write a story, I better have a serial killer because they're scary. But if you're not scared of serial killers, if they seem way too removed from your experience, you're not going to be scared by that. But what if you have a next door neighbor that every week on trash day, he brings a trash can out and it always looks suspiciously filled with black trash bags. And you think to yourself, you know, I could put a body in there. That's what scares you. Not some serial killer 1,000 miles away, but that neighbor. And that's where you would start. Is everyone clear about where I'm saying you might find the source of fear and suspense? Within your own life, within your own experience. And if it scared you as a kid, it still scares you now. As psychologist Alice Miller said, our childhood is the air we breathe. Our childhood is the air we breathe. The other more practical way to build suspense is to use the clock. When they first shot the movie High Noon with Gary Cooper, the director, I think it was Fred Zinnemann.
Gary Cooper.
Yeah, and when they were assembling it in post, it wasn't scary. Nobody felt any tension. And then either Fred or one of his editors said, what if we keep cutting to a clock and we keep seeing that it's getting closer to noon? And now that's one of the primary suspense aspects of High Noon. I did that in my novel, Phantom Limb. The first chapter, a patient he's dealing with says, how long are these sessions? And my therapist says they're 50 minutes. She said, okay, well, I have the means. I have certainly settled all of my affairs. I plan to kill myself at 7 o'clock tonight. You have 50 minutes to talk me out of it. That's how Phantom Limb opens. So already the reader is feeling this tension because there's a ticking clock, and in this case, a literal ticking clock. I plan to kill myself at 7 o'clock tonight. You have 50 minutes to talk me out of it. I don't know too many readers who aren't going to turn the next page. What's he going to do? What's he going to say? And because my Rinaldi stories are written in the first person, I get to have him say that to himself. What the hell am I going to do? What am I going to say? Plus, I'm also angry that I have to deal with this. Who needs this right now? And so one of the ways that in first person you can build suspense is to have your first person narrator describe his or her experience. Now, a lot of classic first person narrators are smart and brave and don't explore their interior experience. One of the values I think you have in first person is you can talk about their fears, what they don't want to happen. You know, my hero encounters a lot of murders and horrible situations over the 6 books in the series so far, including the death of his wife when they were mugged years before the series starts. So when he encounters a death, a murder at the beginning of Panic Attack, he's in the bathroom with his hands shaking and saying to himself, am I going to be followed by sudden death all my life? So with a first person narrator, you can speak to the things that they're concerned about. Their fear, they're wondering if this is something that's going to always be a part of their life. Another classic trope that I think is important if you're writing fear and suspense, whether it's first person or third person, doesn't matter. Have a character say or do something that runs contrary to what the reader already knows or thinks. Have a character say something that contradicts what the reader already knows or thinks. So if you have a third person, I mean, if you're writing in the third person, you see someone pull into a car park, lock the door and walk away, and then 10 minutes later talking to your policeman hero says something like, well, I was nowhere near there. The reader goes, he was there. He's lying. Whenever we know a character is lying, it begins to build a sense of suspense. Now, if you're really tricky as a writer, it may turn out they're lying for some relatively innocent reason. Maybe they're having an affair and they don't want anyone to know that they were at that apartment building. Or it could be that they're actually the killer and they're lying about where they were at the time of the crime. You can decide that. But whenever you're confused or worried about, am I going to build enough suspense so that the reader feels that little prickling at the back of their neck, have a character do or say something that contradicts what the reader knows. That's, I think, a very good way to build suspense. Also, as I was saying earlier, I want to make sure I get this. Yeah, it is that you can use the physical symptoms of your protagonist, whether in first person or third person. If the protagonist is saying, as they walk into a darkened corridor, my heart's pounding, my own footsteps scare me, I'm beginning to imagine killers around every corner. You can help yourself by telling the reader how they should feel. I mean, Shirley Jackson does that at the beginning of The Haunting of Hill House, when she just says Hill House, comma, not sane, comma, you go, what, a house that's not sane? You're already unhappy. You're already nervous. Or you can do it in a slightly more ironic sense, like where Raymond Chandler talks about Philip Marlowe in the first person saying, I had my tie tied, my cheeks shaven, and my shoes shined. I was calling on $1 million. We already know he feels less than. He's going to be nervous talking to his new client. So don't be afraid to use the subjective experience of your lead character. A good example of this is when Clarice Starling goes to that garage in Silence of the Lambs. And even though it's in third person, Harris gives us a very clear picture of how nervous she is. And then he does little things that are kind of cute, like she goes to open the garage door, but it only opens 2 inches. So he's then attenuating what we're going to find in the garage, which brings me to another point. Suspense and dread are not the same as surprise. You want foreshadowing. Surprise, you get, boom, you walk in a room, a bomb blows up. So what? You get a momentary surprise. But if you tell the reader, there's a bomb in there, and then we cut to the protagonist casually walking along on his way to that room, going, gee, I wonder what I'm having for dinner. And we're going, oh my God, he's about to open a door and there's a bomb in there. So what you want to do is build suspense by letting us know something your hero doesn't know. Dread and fear are not the result of a shock or scare. If you think of a horror movie, the shock of someone leaping out, with claws, that's a shock and it scares you. But what really scares you is the 5 minutes where the person's trying to unlock the door to get out, or the 5 minutes when they're walking along a creaky hardwood floor toward a door and building the fear of what are they going to find behind the door. And if you really think about it, no matter how horrible the creature is that jumps out, it's not as bad as what was in your imagination. That's why that shout of fear is also relief. They've literally done studies on this, clinical studies, is that there's kind of a catharsis, like, oh, thank God, it's just something with claws and a tail. Whew. Because the 5 minutes you were walking along the corridor, it's like, oh my God, it's going to be gang rapists, it's going to be, God knows what, And then when you have the big scare, then you go, oh, that makeup wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be. You instantly come away from that fear or dread. So you want to forestall and foreshadow the thing people should be afraid of. I want to say that again. You want to forestall and foreshadow the things people should be afraid of. Now, as a little side issue, I find, again, this is because my Rinaldi books are in first person, the more tension I want to establish, the shorter and punchier the sentences are. That's just a craft thing. Sometimes they're sentence fragments, like, opened the door, no lights were on, I paused, wanted to take a step back, knew I couldn't. These are all punctuated with periods. They're not sentences. Now, I've had many arguments with editors over the years, particularly those who, come from Ivy League school and like complete sentences. My experience is tension works best if your short, punchy sentences psychologically, for the person reading them on the page, indicate breathlessness, indicate pulse quickening, indicate shallow breathing. So just as a craft thing, ask yourself, here's a paragraph with a bunch of long sentences in it. How scared or full of dread do I feel? And here's a paragraph describing the same event or incident with short, punchy sentences, maybe even one word. There was blood everywhere, period. Chandelier, period. Wall, period. Door, period. I look down, period. Now it's on my shoes, period. We know what that guy's thinking. It's all subtext. Short, punchy sentences allow subtext so that the reader is doing a lot of the emotional work for you. Longer sentences, the author is telling you the subtext. I went into the room and saw blood was everywhere. It was on the chandeliers. I even saw some on the walls. And then, of course, after a moment, I looked down and believe it or not, it was even on my shoes. Those are all complete sentences, but I liked what I had done a minute before better. Now, before I go further, I want you to be very clear that what I'm suggesting is my personal opinion. I really recommend that if you like anything I'm suggesting, make use of it. Anything that you don't like or doesn't ring true for you or runs counter to your authorial style, toss it. There's no expert on this because some of the scariest things I've ever read are filled with complete sentences. And some of the stupidest, more foolish, and most the flattest things I've read have a bunch of short sentences in it. It doesn't hurt to be talented. It doesn't hurt to have a good skill set and build your craft. And this brings us right back to the first thing I said. Most really good authors of suspense or fear-driven stories are in touch with their own anxieties and in their head articulate those fears in the way they would write. I articulate my own fears in short, punchy sentences. You know, if I walk down a dark corridor, I think, great, no lights. Great, squeaky floor. What's next? A boogeyman behind the door? That's how I think. And so that's how I write, particularly when you write in first person. So that's what I've had to say up till now about building suspense and dread. The most important things: explore your own fears and doubts, trust them. Don't be afraid to use a ticking clock. I mean, the most common is the serial killer who sends a message to the New York Times, I'll be killing someone within 24 hours. You know, or he sends an email that says, here's a list of the 5 people I'm going to kill. That stuff really works. Just think of the clock in high noon. Is there a clock in your story? Urgency builds dread. One of the reasons why in most murder mysteries, there's the initial murder, and then somewhere in the middle of the book, a second person gets killed, is because the investigation of the initial murder begins to leach suspense because nobody else's life is in danger. The only thing we're doing is following the investigation. And by about 100 pages into that investigation, we're kind of relaxed, where there will sooner or later they'll find a clue that will get the bad guy. But then if the victim's brother-in-law is killed, then we go, whoa, we better step this up. There may be more murders. And in today's crime fiction, there's much more murders. If you think of Agatha Christie stories like, you know, Murder at the Vicarage or something, there's one murder. And we spend the rest of the book trying to solve who did it. But those were kinder days than we have now. This is the days of the internet. This is the days of David Fincher. These are the days of horror movies. And so there's rarely one death in my Rinaldi books. I always have the sense that around any corner is danger. And frankly, that's one of the reasons in the last 5 or 10 years, the diagnosis of anxiety disorders, depression, and now panic attacks are on the rise. We live in an age of trauma, and people do expect there to be a boogeyman around every corner. And so with that, you can't allow the writing to sort of leach out the suspense. You have to always create suspense. And it can be very Simple. Like I said, you can have a character say something that we know is not true. That'll buy you 10 pages of anxiety on the part of your reader. The other, thing that I recommend is using your protagonist's interior feelings, whether it's in first person or a close third person. The more anxious he or she is, the more anxious the reader will be. We believe what the writer tells us. So if the writer says, the character says to himself, I don't like the look of this room, we don't like the look of this room. Or every time I looked at him, he gave me the creeps. Okay, now we believe he's the guy who gives you the creeps. Don't be afraid to talk about the subjective experience, even in third person, of your characters. The last thing I said was short, punchy sentences. This is a craft choice that I use. What's his face? Lee Child uses very, very effectively with his Jack Reacher books. What I do in my books is when there's not action, suspense, or dread, I use regular long sentences. I went home, made myself a cup of coffee, went out on the rear deck, and looked out on the Three Rivers, something like that. But I'm not going to use that stylistic approach if he hears someone behind him. It's going to be, what was that? Question mark. I know it was a footstep, period. There's another one. Okay, I'm imagining things. Coffee's getting cold in my cup, but I can't imagine drinking it right now. These are all sentence fragments. And you, in your mind's eye, you hear those footsteps coming. They're getting louder, he says to himself. God, I hope I'm imagining this. Oh, hell, I'm lying to myself. I'm not. And they're getting faster. That's how you end your chapter. Who doesn't turn the page? All right, I guess I'm done. Does anyone have any questions about what I've suggested? I recommend, because part of doing these kinds of things is shameless self-promotion. So I recommend my Daniel Rinaldi novels. You can read about me and my work on my website. And also, I did send along that short story, which has a character in it. On the first sentence of the short story is, nothing draws the public's attention like a man about to jump off a roof. That's the first sentence of the short story. So already the reader is going, oh no. And then we cut down and there's the cop and there's my hero and there's a crowd of people and there's people with cell phones and the police, the TV news crews come with their trucks. And we see everything building around this news story of a guy on top of a roof threatening to jump. And my hero, the psychologist, this is his patient. And so he goes up to try to talk him out.
Okay, Dennis, we do have a few questions.
So all I'm saying is that story, the reason I'm suggesting you read it, other than the fact I like it, is that it illustrates almost everything I've just talked about.
Okay.
Rather than listen to me, you can read the story.
I will send that out. Okay, we have Larry has a question. Your novels are fast-paced. How do you create that pace and keep it moving so well?
Well, I think a couple reasons. Number one, I used to be a TV and film writer. And before that, I worked in advertising, where as a TV and radio writer, I had to get a lot of information out in 30 seconds. And as a television writer, scenes had to be punchy, dialogue had to be short and to the point. And so I think that's translated into my novels. My chapters are short, number one. And also, I don't belabor anything. One of the things that I think keeps a suspense novel moving is things need to keep happening. So the best way I can describe it is every scene you write should illuminate character, but it should also move the story forward. If it doesn't do both of those things, the scene doesn't work. Not in a crime novel. You can't do 5 pages of 2 people talking at a coffee shop that just illuminates their relationship or gives us information about their past. It has to also move the story forward. And so the reason I think people talk about the pace of my novels is, number one, like I said, my training as a Hollywood writer. But number two, I keep things short and vivid. Every description is short and vivid. Guy comes in, I might say, looked like an oil slick, period. Guy who looked like an oil slick does it all. That's how they move fast. But more importantly, ask yourself with every scene you write, is it both revelatory about character and does it move the story forward? Does it give us narrative information? If it doesn't do both, at least pick move the story forward and narrative information. I mean, that's James Patterson in a nutshell. You know, he's not going to linger too much on people's motivations or their interactions with each other. So if you write suspense, you have to make sure you move the story forward with every scene. If you want to write good suspense, you also make each of those scenes revelatory about character.
Okay. And then we have another question from Diana. How do you let the reader know something the character doesn't know when you're writing in first person?
Oh, that's really simple. Just have the guy say, I don't know. I often have Rinaldi go, there was something about the way he answered that told me I wasn't getting the whole story. See, when you're inside the first person's mind, you can extrapolate a lot of things. You can say to yourself, why would a house like that need so many locks? So we don't know why it needs so many locks, but he's prompted us to worry about it. So the first person narrator can reveal that he doesn't know, he or she doesn't know something, which implies we should be worried about that thing he doesn't know.
Okay. All right. Okay, let's see. Also from Larry, his comment was the first line from Phantom Limb. The last time I saw Lisa Campbell, she was naked. He said he was hooked in a second. So
yeah, everybody's hooked in a second. The last time I saw Lisa Campbell, she was naked. I'm a big fan of great first lines. Now, so that nobody panics, the very next sentence said, like every other 17-year-old boy, I stared at her from the pages of Playboy magazine. But the point is, I'm a big believer. My first sentence in Panic Attack is one of my favorites, which is, let me see.
Bitterly cold.
On a bitterly cold morning afternoon in November, I was one of 20,000 witnesses to a murder.
wow.
It's a great first sentence. So I'm a big believer in fact, my favorite first sentence is the first sentence of my first Rinaldi novel, Mirror Image, which is simply, shame is a deep well. I'm telling the reader right off the bat, we're going to go to some dark places here.
Yeah, I love that. Okay. So is there a formula for writing suspense?
If there is, I don't know it. Because I don't plan or outline. I'm a total pantser. That phrase comes from seat of the pants. There are writers who know every beat of every chapter and how it's going to end. I start with a sentence that occurs to me. Like when I wrote the one about I was 20,000 witnesses to a murder. The only thing I knew is he was in a crowd of people. I didn't know where he was. I didn't know who had gotten murdered, and I didn't know who murdered them. I don't know anything. I write my first sentence and go. Now, it is literally the most inefficient way to write a thriller, particularly because my thrillers, if they're known at all, are known for lots of twists and turns, which would give you the illusion that they had been well planned and well thought out. They're not well planned and well thought out. Every time I bump into a twist, I'm as surprised writing it as I hope the reader will be reading it. Now, the downside of that, like not knowing who the victim is until about page 80 and not knowing who the killer is till about halfway through the book, is you have to go back and seed the early 150 pages with clues. You have to lay pipe that leads up to that logically. That's a pain in the butt. I write a lot of pages that I end up rewriting, but I'd rather write than think. When I was a screenwriter working for a studio, or a network, you had to outline everything. You got so many notes, you changed it again, you re-outlined it. By the time you went to write the script, you'd already seen the movie or TV show in your head. And I believe, like John Fowles, the novelist, said, a planned world is a dead world. I'd prefer not to know what I'm doing. I'm willing to write 20 pages that lead me into a cul-de-sac. And I go, this isn't working. I don't mind because, number one, I like to write. Number two, invariably, there's a line of dialogue or a description that I can take from those 20 useless pages and put them back into the work that I'm working. Like I said, I'm willing to, when I write one of my Rinaldi books, I get all the way to the end and I write the end. And then I find out what I got. Oh, there's too much emphasis over here. There's not enough emphasis over here. I didn't build this character enough. I don't mess with anything. I just keep going until it says the end, because I know I'm going to rewrite it 5 more times. So I don't recommend this process to anyone. It's incredibly inefficient, but I'd rather play with the clay than sit back and diagram what my vase is going to look like and then build the vase from that clay. I'd rather make a vase that doesn't work and go, let's mess up the clay and rebuild it. That's the way I do it. Don't recommend it, by the way.
Okay, so is there a different approach to writing fear and suspense when writing horror? Is there a difference between the way you approach that versus
Well, I've
thriller?
never written horror. I've only written suspense and thriller. I have a couple horror writers in my practice, and the only difference is the extremity of what your suspense or dread leads you up to. You know, it can lead you to, you know, getting your head chopped off or dismembered or all this other stuff. Most crime thrillers, while they have those kinds of grand guignol elements, and mine do. I mean, I have a nice, in Night Terrors, I have a very nice severed head that the bad guy used as the head of a snowman he builds on the front lawn of the church. He has the big ball of snow on the bottom, the middle ball of snow in the middle, but instead of the ball on the top, he has the guy's actual head. I like that. I thought that was kind of horrific. So I think it just depends on your personality. What scares me is stuff that feels irrational like that, doing something deliberately grotesque. If you ever saw the episode of Mindhunter, where they interview Ed Kemper, the character of Ed Kemper, the co-ed killer, and he talks about what happened when he killed his mother. That is so grotesque what he does, that crosses the line into horror. So I can't speak to it because I don't write horror. I would just imagine that everything is ratcheted up in terms of the consequences. And you also, with horror, you get the advantage of it doesn't have to have rationality. It could be a ghost or a creature or a demon or someone who's possessed. I remember when I read The Exorcist, I was scared as hell, because you can't write a crime thriller where a person levitates and their head twivels on their neck. Crime thrillers are the most effective when they feel like they could actually happen if a person was bad enough or evil enough. In horror, things happen just because they're in the imagination of the writer, so anything could happen.
It's funny you said The Exorcist. I think that's the book that scared me out of any book that I've ever read, was that book, and that line that said, if you let the wings of evil brush you, you have opened the door. So I immediately closed the book and threw it out. I was like, okay, I heard you. I will put that money down the drain and throw the book right out. And I did. I closed the book and threw it out.
Well, imagine if you're Robert Louis Stevenson, you write Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, you give it to your wife to read. She's so horrified, she throws it in the fireplace and burns it. And so he rewrites it from memory. So a little known factoid is that the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde that we read today is his remembered version of the first one that he wrote that his wife threw into the fire.
Oh my God, that's some scary stuff. Okay. What is the most common way writers kill suspense? So when you're reading a book and you're looking at that, how do you kill suspense or missed opportunities maybe?
Yeah, I think you kill suspense by giving too much information. I think that the more that's left out, the better. So if somebody says, I'm up on a roof, I have a gun, it's a Colt 45, and the next person that comes in the roof, on top of the roof, I'm going to shoot him. That's not very suspenseful. What's much more suspenseful is, where's Bob? And then someone goes, not only that, where was that gun? Where's that gun that was on the table? That foreshadows Bob is left with the gun. What's going to happen next? So I always think you have to foreshadow just enough. And this comes from doing it over and over. You can't like take a class in this. You have to write it and then give it to a beta reader who reads it and goes, you know, I knew Bob was going to shoot someone. Oh, okay. Well, then let me go through this thing with a rake and take out anything that takes away the foreshadowing but reveals too much. And so the key is to reveal just enough to make us nervous and to imply something bad's going to happen, but not so much that we know the result. It's like what I said before. It's scarier to walk down a dark corridor and imagine what's behind the door than when the door opens and a guy comes out and goes, boo. We actually, oh. Well, if you're walking down the corridor and say to yourself, well, when I open the door, there's going to be a thing with fangs in it that's going to jump out. The suspense is leached away. Because we say, well, then don't walk down the corridor. You know, it's what I call the too stupid to live character. And so you don't want to be that. One of the things that does leach suspense, by the way, is the too stupid to live character. Readers really complain about that when a character does something where you go, well, of course you're going to be in danger if you do that.
Okay. And then does setting have a place in suspense?
Setting, I think setting has an amazingly important place in suspense. You can make any setting suspenseful. You can make a dinner table at Thanksgiving with the family members really suspenseful. It's important to remember that setting alone isn't suspenseful. Yeah, if you're in a lighthouse on a rocky island, hundreds of miles from the mainland, and the sea is crashing against the rocks, that implies suspense. But you can do exactly the same thing if you're sitting at a dinner table at Thanksgiving and you're trying to work up the courage to tell your family you're coming out. So the setting only is suspenseful in relationship to the event that's being dealt with. One of the things that proves that is how suspenseful most interrogation scenes are in good crime thrillers. They're suspenseful because it's a cat and mouse game between the interrogator and the suspect. And the setting is a windowless room. But if you do it right, a windowless room can be as scary as one of the 7 circles of hell. It certainly is for the suspect. And then you ratchet that up where, I wish there were a window, or can you turn up the air conditioning, or is it possible to get a drink of water? They keep reminding us of how horribly claustrophobic and terrifying it is. And then the cop says, don't worry, make yourself comfortable. We'll be here a long time. Then that little room becomes more and more terrifying.
Okay. And Debbie wants to know, do you use maniacal humor or humor of a character?
Oh, God, yes. In fact, my favorite character in the whole series, other than Daniel Rinaldi, is his best friend, Noah Fry, who is a paranoid schizophrenic. And he's the representative of what the indigenous people call crazy wisdom. He's always funny and snarky and crazy. And so he'll often comment on things going on. Rinaldi goes in there, it's his favorite bar, and he'll have a drink and talk about something he did or whatever, or Noah will mention something he saw on the news, because Daniel Rinaldi is one of those talking heads on CNN, and he'll just make fun of it. And he's a good source of snarky humor. The other good source is the police detective with whom Daniel Rinaldi interacts a lot, who doesn't like him, who thinks he has no business being a consultant on the force. And that's Detective Sergeant Harry Polk. And Harry Polk represents the average guy. He thinks therapy is for nutcases. He thinks any of this touchy-feely stuff is bullshit. The idea that there is any kind of understandable background that motivates a crook doesn't interest him at all. To him, it's like blah, blah, pity, pity. Let's just get the bastard, you know? And so their interactions are always pretty funny. Because Daniel Rinaldi, you know, because he's a little snarky, baits him all the time. And, you know, says stuff like, you know, what are you doing chewing gum? Usually you smoke to get rid of your infantile regression, you know? And he goes, there you go, using those big words again, you know? So it's that kind of relationship, though much funnier than what I just said, that gives a lot of humor. One of the things that I hear from readers all the time is how surprised they are that the books are so suspenseful but funny.
Is humor a release? I mean, do you use humor to, how do you use that purposefully, I guess is my
Yeah, no, it's used as a catharsis, number one. And number two, I've never known, because I know cops, I've never known anyone in a suspenseful situation. Like when I worked at the psychiatric hospital as an intern therapist, the staff had to use humor because the situations of the patients were so horrible. Humor is what allows a professional who's doing a really hard job. My first wife used to work with disabled children. She was a school teacher for disabled children, and she called them the little monsters. And she'd go, oh God, the little monsters killed me today. Well, I knew how much she loved her students. Little monsters was a way for her to release the tension and frustration of working with those people. Anybody who's ever written for show business, a network or a producer or a studio, you better use humor to describe the development process that you're going through, because it's hellish. And, you know, you have to be able to say to yourself some version of, my God, you know, this is like the Bataan Death March, you know. So humor does, I think, release a certain amount of catharsis. So I'll have like an incredibly difficult scene happen. I had one in Panic Attack where a hero almost gets killed, a cop saves him, and the cop says to him, you're that shrink that's on the payroll. He said, yeah, Harry Polk told me about you. And my hero had done something really stupid in going after this bad guy. And the cop said, yeah, he said you were messed up in the head. You know, so everybody commenting on my hero is often done with some humor.
Okay. All right. And then Larry wants to know, are flashbacks good or obstructions to pace?
Fresh facts?
Flashbacks.
Flashbacks. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer for that. There are people for whom flashbacks are crucial to building suspense. For me, I only use them sparingly. You know, again, because I'm in the first person, I can say something like, boy, it reminds me of the way my dad used to talk to me when I was an amateur boxer and he was coaching me from the corner. Though I don't know if coaching is the right word, since what he mostly did was scream insults and obscenities at me. That's about as far back as I'll go, maybe a paragraph or two. The only time I use flashbacks consistently is I usually start each book with an event. A murder, a scary patient, you know, Night Terrors begins with me and the killer as the killer takes us to where he put the body. And then chapter 2, I go back 24 hours to explain how I got there. What am I doing there? What role do I have in that investigation? So I don't know if I'd call that a flashback, but it's more that my first chapters tend to be what in TV and film is called a teaser. I put us right in the middle of the action in the present tense. And my second chapter almost invariably explains who I am and what I'm doing there. When I say I mean my hero, Daniel Rinaldi, who I am and what I'm doing there. And then by the third chapter, we're back in the present again, picking up where we had been in the first chapter. So I don't know if I'd call those flashbacks. I just think of them as like the first chapter being a teaser, the second chapter telling us where we are, who we are, what am I doing there, and why. And then I go on.
Okay. And then can you give an example of how you foreshadow?
Oh, that's easy. You foreshadow by saying something, have a character or either say or think something about what they're going to do, what they're going to say. Like, the next time I see that guy, I'm going to punch him in the face. I've had it. Well, chapters later, when he runs into the guy, we go, is he going to punch him in the face? The thing about foreshadowing is you can either have someone say something, or you could have something as simple as, he said there was nothing for me to worry about, but I wonder why the doors are all locked. Or, I know that he said there was nothing to worry about. Why is he holstering his gun? Why is he taking his gun out of his holster? In other words, to create a question that puts doubt in the reader's mind.
Interesting. Okay. And then do you keep information from the reader or the main character to create suspense?
Yes, harder to do with first person because it feels like a cheat. I don't like first person narratives where the first person goes, I finally figured it out. But this is not the time to tell them. You know, I hate that shit. If we're supposed to be in the guy's head, we should only know what he knows when he knows it. The only times I do that is I might have Daniel talking to someone and then say something, and then to the reader write, I knew I was lying, but it was the only way I could get to the truth, which was beginning to dawn on me. In other words, whenever the reader is about to learn something that Daniel learned about 10 seconds earlier, I sort of flag it and say, it had finally occurred to me what was going on. Or like in Panic Attack, a chapter ends with, I thought everything was over until I realized I had one more question to ask. And we realize, oh, he's come up with a question, but don't worry, in the next chapter, we're going to find out what it is. So it's a little bit of a cheat. But if you said, I knew I had one more question to ask, and this was it, that's not as exciting or doesn't make you turn the page as I knew I had one more question to ask, period. And we're there, what question? To who? That makes you turn the page.
Okay. And we have a few more that I think are really interesting. One is, how do you keep emotions at the center without the danger of it taking control?
Wow, that's a good question. That's why God invented advising. I tend to overwrite emotional stuff. I tend to overwrite what's going on in Daniel's head about his subjective experience of the people he's talking to and his reaction to them. And then in my next pass, I whittle that stuff down. I think on the whole, you're much better off writing than thinking. And so if you just write a lot and then step back, and while you're reading it, go, I'm losing the tension. I'm beginning to not have any sense of momentum or urgency. And again, this is when your craft has to be built over time. Where if I look at the first novel, Mirror Image, I think there's a little too much rumination going on inside my hero's first person head. There's a lot pithier and less of it as the books go on. We teach ourselves what our authorial voice is. You know, you can watch someone do the breaststroke for an hour and a half, but you don't know and learn how to do the breaststroke until you get in the pool and start trying. So writers rarely learn how to be the best writer they can be merely by reading other writing. Your job is to write something that's flabby, recognize that it's flabby, and cut out the fat.
Okay.
Okay. For me,
So
again, it's mostly killing your precious darlings. If I have really great insight about a character and it doesn't move things along and it feels to me a little too self-conscious and self-aggrandizing, I close my eyes, hold my nose, and cut it.
So Leonard has a question. Says, writing is therapy. I guess you guys both know that. Have you found that writing helps you deal with and resolve some of your own issues?
Oh, absolutely. Particularly because my lead character is so is based a lot on me. you know, he's an Italian American, born and raised in Pittsburgh, went to Pitt, blue collar family, first among his generation to go to college, all that stuff. You know, I wasn't an amateur boxer, but and also I'm not brave and resourceful like Daniel Rinaldi is. But I think writing at minimum is secondarily therapeutic, whether you're writing poetry or prose or a play, whatever. Remember, because I think all writing's autobiographical. I mean, if you're writing a historical novel that takes place 300 years from now, ago, you're still writing from an autobiographical standpoint, based on everything you think about those characters, all the research you chose to do. Yeah, it's all autobiographical. And so therefore, I think secondarily therapeutic.
Okay. And then finally, can you say a few words on your book, Writing from the Inside Out, and its importance to writers?
Well, I don't know if I can talk about its importance, but I will say, let me see. It's based on a column I wrote in the Writers Guild magazine. The column was called The Writer's Life. And what I did was I took all the columns, there were 92 of them, and I expanded them into a book called Writing from the Inside Out. And what's special about this book is it doesn't give you one piece of information about how to write. It's about living the writer's life. So it deals with procrastination, writer's block, fear of failure, anxiety, depression. Should you work with a partner? The issues in a writer's life, that loneliness, solitude, you know. And I've been unbelievably gratified by the success of this book. It's taught in universities all over the world. It's on the reading list of, you know, dozens and dozens and dozens of writing seminars. It continues to sell almost 15 years after it was first released. I think it's a valuable resource for people because it specifically goes after the things that all writers experience and rarely talk about. And so I've gotten nothing but really gratifying responses to that book. And, you know, it's written from a clinical or therapeutic standpoint. I don't talk about writer's block like, oh, just keep working. I don't do that. I talk about the meaning you give to being blocked, what it says about you as a writer, how growthful it is to navigate a block. I have ideas about writer's block that I think are proven by the fact that I've never met a writer who, having navigated a block, didn't think they were a better writer on the other side of it. So I see them as appropriate and necessary developmental steps in your growth as a writer. So I have a perspective on things like procrastination and writer's block and stuff that comes from a clinician standpoint and based on 30 years of dealing with writer patients. I mean, that's my specialty. So I think that's why the book strikes people, because it isn't about how to write. It's about how to survive being a writer.
So interesting. Okay. And so it's such a great discussion this morning. How can people get a hold of autographed copies of your work? I mean, Panic Attack is coming out in the time of the pandemic. So
yeah, it's harder. What you can do, I guess, is in Pittsburgh, there's the Mystery Lovers Bookshop, where I always launch my books. And this year, for the first time, I launched it on Zoom. But I sent them about 50 autographed book plates. And so I guess they're just going to stick them in the book. So you can, if you want an autographed copy of Panic Attack, I'd contact the Mystery Lovers Bookshop in Pittsburgh and see if they have any of those autographed book plates left. It doesn't matter which, though. I really recommend independent bookstores. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to keep those indie bookstores going. I mean, Jeff Bezos can fly up into space and stay there for all I care. And so I recommend it. But I can't think of any other way. I do have people who send the book to me at my office. I sign it and send it back.
Okay.
They're willing to do. So. Okay.
All right. Otherwise, your books are out there. Panic Attack is your latest book.
Yeah, Panic Attack. I have it here.
Great cover.
Boy, it came back. Anyway, it's really good. I think it's one of the best in the series. Most people reviewing it think it is the best in the series. And it has a really big twist 2/3 of the way in that nobody sees coming, which I'm proud of. And by the way, when I was writing it, I didn't know that was coming either. And so, yeah, that's the new one, Panic Attack. You can get it at bookstores. You can get it, of course, from Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever you buy your books online. And I'd appreciate it if you read it, write a review. Reviews really, really help. Also, it'll be in most libraries, so you can take it out if you don't want to buy it.
Great.
I support libraries too.
Okay, well, I think this, your talk was perfectly timed for the upcoming NaNoWriMo in November. I know that we are starting our NaNoWriMo workshop rooms on Facebook on Wednesday mornings after Hump Day. So if anybody's interested in starting their next novel November 1st and writing that novel during the course of that month, this is a good beginning, and just write. Listen to what Dennis said and don't think, just write. And I think that's the whole impetus behind NaNoWriMo. So this is a good kickoff for November. So Wednesday mornings, we hope to see you in the writer's room.